When considering the role of a writer, two stereotypes typically pop into my head. The first is that of the television writer in a writer's room, surrounded by others, bouncing ideas off and quickly developing episodes. The second is the isolated feature writer who abides all alone in a dark room and probably drinks his or her health away. My notion is that as independent writers, or writers who are just starting out, we tend to think that we are all alone in this process and we relate more to that latter scenario. I want to encourage you today that it's not wrong to take advantage of tools to help you expedite your process and become less lonely. I think of Hundreds of Beavers, which I recently covered in a long-form video. Stated in their director's commentaries, they used a fair amount of stock footage from Shutterstock in the film to help with their compositions. The film was no worse for it either, it was simply economical. In the indie game dev scene, there are entire sites dedicated to selling assets that can be placed into other commercial games, which is a huge help for indies. Particularly if there's an element of the craft that you struggle with, there's no shame in receiving help. That being said, the distinction between laziness and craftiness can be spotted with ease, and you have to make sure both your heart and your efforts are in the right place. While there are websites like Shutterstock that might help with the post-production side of your film, we're focused on pre-production. So what is my recommendation to help you get through the writing process? Writing adaptations. Let's consider the positions we find ourselves in as writers. If you're a more analytical writer, the most common pitfall is to capture yourself in the outlining phase, spending weeks and months and maybe even years of your life trying to perfect that outline. In this cycle, you manage to never write a single real page of script because you obsess over the perfection of it all. On the other hand, if you're a more emotional writer, you tend to get 20 or 40 pages into a million screenplays, but you always get stuck there because you really struggle to see the 40,000 foot view of the whole project. The puzzle pieces just don't fall into place and it never becomes a cohesive project, even if some of the moments are awesome. No matter which type of writer you are, pursuing an adaptation of a novel, a video game, comic book, true story, or whatever else will inherently provide you with some parameters that will help you escape your tendencies and progress forward. And trust me, the feeling of actually bringing a screenplay to completion is monumental. For analytical writers, you're going to have to learn to actually trust the outline that is already established by the source material. Yes, of course you can take liberties with it, but the most important thing is that it should give you a framework that you don't have to question because it's already been thought through. Hopefully. Sorry, no, it's already been thought through. I'm an analytical writer, if you can't tell. The big help to you will be taking the leap into the pages. At this point, you may have had next to no experience actually writing the characters and scenes to life. You probably have ideas of what those things look like in your head and they feel perfect, but you still have to bring them to life. Don't be afraid to literally begin by copying some of the dialogue verbatim from the source material. It'll help you get into the shoes of the characters and learn how to speak as them through them. For emotional writers, it'll be most helpful just to have that framework that'll cast a vision for you. You should already have ideas for where you want to take the moment to moment, but you can find relief in having the skeleton propped up for you already. Now, hopefully you can actually enjoy that process of writing these characters better, knowing that it's in service of something strong and complete in nature. There's nothing more defeating than writing a really good moment that you feel like can never find a place in something complete. In my opinion, most of the best films ever made have been born out of the pressure of parameters, restrictions, and guidelines that the artist actively has to fight against. If you can learn to use your boundaries and shortcomings to your advantage, you will have a massive leg up over the majority of writers and filmmakers. When artists are offered unlimited freedom, the art is almost never as good. That's just Albert's opinion, but I think it's true. Now that I've given you that overview, let's dive into some of the adaptation that I'm currently working on. I had been toying around with the idea of making an adaptation for a while, but I wasn't completely sure of where to begin or which project to choose specifically. What really set me off on the journey was when I saw the reporting that Luca Guadagnino had signed on with his recent writing partner, Justin, we're going to call him, to make a film adaptation of Sergeant Rock for DC Studios under the new James Gunn and Peter Safran leadership. I hadn't considered making a comic book movie up to this point just because of biases and it's a trend and all of that, but honestly, my admiration for Luca's work sparked something in me to challenge myself to write a genuinely great and self-contained comic book film. But I also decided that I wanted the process to be as educational as possible for me. So I began looking at what projects Gunn had already got in the pipeline. This certainly isn't something you have to do when you're looking at making an adaptation, especially if you're looking for it to be produced. But I wanted to choose a project that was already entering production so that I could then compare my screenplay to their version when the film was released. Some of the options on the table were Gunn's Superman, Craig Gillespie's Supergirl, or James Watkins' Clayface. I decided to dive into Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, simply because it was the only one of the three that was explicitly based on a singular comic book, while the other two projects seemed to be a culmination of many touch points, if that makes sense. I felt that the Supergirl project had the strongest foundation for both a direct adaptation out of the defined source material, and thus a strong basis by which to draw comparisons between my work and theirs. Now, I had chosen this project, but I still didn't know if the material would actually connect with me, so diving into the process, the first step was to actually read the comic strip. I read through the entire book from front to back, which was an 8-issue run, without taking any notes. I just read through it. I sat to let the story sink in for a day or two before I hopped back in and took notes on a second read-through. I felt like it was necessary to actually just soak up the story as if I were reading it as just a consumer, to make sure that it's something I felt emotion out of. I think when working on an adaptation, it's important to pinpoint first what thematic piece of the story speaks to you, because an adaptation cannot be a simple regurgitation. It can't be a regurgitation. It still needs to leverage your strengths. Inserting your voice into the project is what will make it a worthwhile adaptation. People often cry about book-to-film adaptations that aren't 100% accurate, and while that's a much bigger and more nuanced subject, I would encourage you that those projects, which are usually just a simple regurgitation to the screen, are often the most sterile adaptations. And that's usually because the original format in which a story was created is going to be the best version of that for a reason. So you have to bring the strengths of the medium and the strengths of yourself to an adaptation to make it worthwhile. Okay, getting back on track. I worked on pinpointing which element of the thematics spoke to me, which I think mirrored some of the themes of The Last of Us Part 2, a game which I'm endlessly fascinated by, so I certainly found an angle I was into. After that, while taking notes, write down the defining character arcs, the pivotal turning points, and overall structure. It's easy to think that you know these elements after taking in the story, but challenge yourself to actually write it all down for yourself, because that'll put your understanding of the mechanics of the story to the test. I guarantee you there'll probably be something that kind of makes you hold up a little bit because you're like, why did they do this? And I had that with Supergirl as well, and that really challenges you to make sure you know the direction that the story's heading in. It's a good exercise. So now that we've read and taken the notes, we need to come to the outlining phase. I would encourage you to follow the big beats and not stress too much about the outline at this point. Define that structure on the page, but then also allow yourself to create new scenes here or there, if relevant to the theme that you're chasing after. Allow yourself to both create and cut scenes, but just make sure that that framework that you're working in for those decisions is filtered through the vision of your theme. I would say that you should only spend a week maximum on the outlining phase. There's no point obsessing over the story at this phase because you've already got a strong foundation to work off of, and you just need to get into there and start writing the characters through your voice. That was the point of doing the adaptation. So we come to what I call the barf draft. Base your draft off the outline that you've just created. Allow yourself to lift the dialogue from the source material, and it may help you get started to get an idea of who the characters are. The reality is that there will have to be new dialogue and new moments just for the flow of the story to work. So the creation process is inevitable, but don't feel that you have to do everything yourself. The biggest thing is that the barf draft is not to be judged. Don't judge what you write. Don't go back and tweak what you've already written until you get through the entire draft. Allow yourself to go crazy and just have fun writing it if you can. Set guidelines for yourself and make sure you finish this first draft within a month or two. To put a cherry on top of this conversation, let me reiterate that the point of creating an adaptation under this context is to help you get off the ground as a writer with frameworks and a push start. If you can find yourself still struggling with the creative process, there is one step further that I think you could take. I would recommend considering completely retyping a pre-existing screenplay. You can go to ScriptSlug and download a screenplay that you love, and the process of retyping that screenplay will teach you a lot. Forcing yourself into the shoes of the artists you respect will put you in a position where you can't help but make the same decisions that they made, and that will hopefully teach you something about their craft. It'll also undeniably get your fingers typing, which is what we're looking for here. I mentioned this in one of my other videos, but I know some composers who challenge themselves to recreate songs and compositions note by note based off of their ear's ability to listen. In that same way, forcing yourself to simply read the script without seeing how it translates on the screen will teach you something as well. I would recommend sometimes reading a screenplay before you watch the movie so you can see that translation process. I've been trying to give you some tools in this video to get typing, so I just want to say that it all comes back to the point that you shouldn't be staring at a blank screen. Just get up and start writing no matter what the excuse is. There is a way you can get yourself to type, even if there's writer's block. Thanks for watching this episode, guys. If you enjoyed it or found it informative, leave it a like and subscribe if you would. If you thought it could have been better though, please give it a thumbs down and leave me some constructive criticisms in the comments below so that I can do better next time. Thanks guys, I'll see you later.